So on and so forth is a series of conversations with Professor Hiren Gohain that explores Professor Gohain's rise as a renowned literary critic and a fearless public intellectual. What inspired Professor Gohain's lifelong engagement with literature? How did F. Lewis shape Professor Gohain's worldview on literature? What sparked Gohain to transform himself into a Marxist literary critic? What is Hiren Gohain's pivotal role in redefining the Assamese middle class? And what has been his thoughtful stance on Assam agitation, Ulfa, NRC, and Ka? Why does Hiren Gohain challenge postmodernism, post-colonialism, and subaltern historiography with such commitment and conviction? Join me in this series of exclusive conversations that will uncover Hiren Gohain's enduring legacy both as a literary critic and also a political thinker. I'm very happy to introduce Professor Hiren Gohain, the quintessential public intellectual of Assam. Professor Gohain is renowned for his fearless engagement with contentious issues and his readiness to challenge entrenched prejudices. Gohain has earned both widespread acclaim and significant criticism for his probing questions aimed at those in power, whether in government or society. His defining characteristics is his unwavering commitment to speaking truth to power. Dedicated to the cause of ordinary people, Gohain has rigorously defended democratic rights, social justice, and societal integrity. A fervent advocate of secularism and communal harmony, he holds Assam and its people in deep regard. Despite his profound connection to the region, he has persistently confronted the chauvinistic tendencies fueled by vested interests within society. Gohain, an eminent scholar of English literature, earned his PhD from the Cambridge University in late 1960s. He taught English literature at Guwahati University for more than 3 decades. For more than 6 decades now, he has been the most cited literary critic and political commentator in Northeast India, particularly in the state of Assam. He is a bilingual author and a regular contributor to both local dailies and prominent English newspapers and journals. Gohain has extensively examined and analyzed nearly every facet of nationality question in Assam, spanning literature and politics. So, welcome to this conversation.
Thank you.
Today, we plan to talk about your contribution to the literary criticism, particularly your evolution as a literary critic. So, I want to start with your days in Cotton College. In your autobiography, in the first volume of your autobiography, Botahot Kor Godhuli Gopal, you have given indications, you have indicated that you were exposed to the world of literary reviews, literary criticisms, and your teachers, particularly Mohendra Bora and Nobokanto Borua, and also Hem Borua, poet Hem Borua, who was principal of the Borua College, had an influence in you in the making of a literary critic. So we'd like to have some elaboration on it.
All those things happened 60 years ago.
Yes, sir.
So memory has become a little dim and sometimes treacherous. But I hope I shall be able to recall whatever had impressed me and left an impression on my mind. As far as I remember, I was a fairly good student of English. And I remember showing my things, my essays and so on, answers to questions to Professor Hiren Dutta, who was at the time head of the Department of English at Cotton College. He examined it and said that you write English like a degree student, but there's something lacking in my answers. So that both exhilarated me and put me off. I realized that in my love of English and flair for writing, I had missed certain things. One of those things where I learned at President's College later on. Our teachers, particularly Mahendra Bora, was very enthusiastic.
Yes.
It was enthusiasm for literature, literary classics that infected us. When he was in the classroom, it was alive. Navakanta was more detached. We were like higher secondary classes students at that time. The teachers did not take it very seriously. They just sort of ran through the classes. But then I caught the attention of some of them. And Navakanto at that time impressed me by his critical attitude to stories and poems. And that I didn't appreciate at the time. But when I look back, I realized that more than Mahendra Bora, he had a critical attitude to the things, the works and the poems, stories that we had read, that were in our course. And there were other teachers like Raihan Shah.
So they were pioneers of modernism in literature.
Yeah. But in the classroom, there is not much scope for discussion. I also met them privately. And I became a junior member of the movement for modernist literature. And they looked upon me as a younger member of the group and had been very kind and affectionate to me. That I must recall.
Yes. You also referred to some very interesting incidents, like Bhavananda Datta being very critical about them.
Yeah. Actually, there are two types of audience that did not take to modernism in literature. The old guard, that was very strong. And they thought that they were kind of bizarre, absurd things that were introduced by these so-called modernist writers. And they were dead against it. In his presidential address at Assam Sahitya Sabha at that time, apparently ghost written by Maheshwar Nehru, there was a frontal attack on modernist poetry.
By Jatindranath Dwara.
Jatindranath Dutta, yes. And it was answered by Mahendra Bora in Ramdin. Ramdin was the organ of modernist literature. And Birendra Kumar Bhattacharya was liberal enough to include all shades of people, communists also,
Modernists.
like Bhavananda Datta and Ram Gogoi, and also modernists. They were not in the same camp actually. But Birendra Bhattacharya, though he made this organ, Ramdhanu, almost the kind of organ of modernist literature, but he also accommodated some leftist writings. So we were exposed to a variety of kinds of writing. And I don't look back upon those things as the things I had written that then as something very great. But I suppose when people look at it, they will think that he had some kind of promise
Yes.
that, you know, he had potential to growth. So that is what I recall from
Yes.
those days. But I think, my general taste was influenced by Lodit Burwa,
Lalit Borwa,
who
yes.
had come from Jorhat. And
So
he
he
had
was also your schoolmate?
no, he was
No,
not.
only in Cotton College.
I think he came in second year or something.
Yes,
So I met him rather late.
yes.
But then we became very close friends.
And he remained a friend till Delhi University days.
I don't know, there's a gap. He could not join Presidency College.
Yes.
There's something funny I will tell you. He had a very fine taste for music,
Yes.
in which I was a kind of not even an amateur.
Yes.
I had very little knowledge for music. Though I listened to all the songs and so on, and I had no sense of fine discrimination, and he had. So that greatly, benefited me. And it is through such context that people grow.
Yes. So Presidency College turned out to be it was a turning point for you.
Yeah, because that is where I learned what actually criticism meant, scholarship meant. Many of the teachers were what you would call today Biddar Jahas, vastly erudite people. Yeah. And also, their knowledge was not confined to one particular field, but several fields at the same time. That sort of, impressed me, struck me dumb. These people know so much. And they are also thorough about the details. That, each detail was, I mean, in Assam, when we read a text, a story or a poem, we were satisfied with the general meaning, general direction, general sense of the text. But we were not very particular about the details. But those scholars and, well, I would say critics in the staff of President's College, they were very alive to the little nuances of those details.
You very particularly talked about Amal Bhattacharjee, your teacher, who influenced you
Yeah.
greatly.
And actually, the better known man was Tarak Sen.
Tarak Sen, yes.
And some of his teachings at that time, still remain with me. He was very strict, disciplinarian, and also somewhat authoritarian.
You had to leave his classes.
And that is how. So, though I
Yes,
caught his attention at first,
yes.
his authoritarian strictness sort of upset me. So, I cannot say I fell out. Increasingly I came under disfavor because I would not take all his opinions lying down. Sometimes I would challenge, and he didn't like it. And sometimes the challenges were, of course, very juvenile, but some were quite to the point. But he didn't like it.
But what
Because
about
he
Amal
was,
Bhattacharjee? Amal Bhattacharjee.
this was the kind of danger that respect for scholarship has. If a man acquires vast knowledge, he acquires a sense of self-importance, which of course is quite natural. When you know something vast, a lot more than other people, you are likely to think that you are right in everything. And that is not the truth, actually. And that does not work out that way.
So your Sahityor Saitya, the
No,
first, yes, please.
So when I read Shakespeare now, often I remember, yes, this is what Tarak Sen said. This is how he taught us. So you see, 50 years later, 60 years later, whenever even today, I read a Shakespearean text, I remember his insights and the methods he had applied to study Shakespeare to the smallest detail, and the wealth of meaning the lines carried. Amal Bhattacharya was a more free man, and he was particularly interested in the capacities of students and nursing them. And fortunately, I sort of caught his eye, and he was particularly kind to me. And I was especially struck by one thing. His father was a civil surgeon, what is they call joint medical officer, something, district medical officer, or something like that, He was working in Golaghat. And he said that his father was so impressed by the honesty and simplicity of Assamese
people
that he recalled this to the very end of his life. This also, made me happy. Amal Babu, as we all called him, he was under the influence of new criticism. Tarak Babu had nothing to do with it. He thought their claims were exaggerated. He knew, but he did not follow their method. Amal Babu followed the method of the new critics, people like F.R. Lewis and L.C. Knights, whom I later met at Cambridge, and other people, The magazine Scrutiny, edited by F.R. Lewis, it was a kind of, center of a new kind of criticism. And he was buffeted left and right by conservative critics, but they held their own, and in the end, introduced a kind of rigorous, disciplined reading of literature, which revolutionized, for that time, the study of English. But they were not in favor with the conservative set.
So he was a modernist.
Huh?
Lewis was a modernist.
Modernist, but not all modernists were actually liked or admired him, because very combative and had very particular sort of attention to not only literature but the values that it represented.
So I remember somewhere you talked about rationality and ethics.
Yeah?
Rationality and ethics on the part of Lewis, or Lewis' approach to literature.
No, ethics is most important. Rationality means rigorous reading of literature. That you must have unwavering attention to every detail of the meaning and the nuance of particular words, the rhythm. You must soak yourself into the world of the text so that you forget everything else. And at the same time, rigorous and attentive. And that made the study of a poem both a very difficult and a very thrilling experience. And so Lewis, Amal Babu introduced us to that difficult but thrilling experience. So I remember I'm so impressed by his teaching that I had wrote about 4 or 5 long analysis of the poem Ode to a Nightingale.
Yes.
4 or 5 in my own hand. In exercise books I have kept some of them. And for a boy of 19 or 20, I'm an undergraduate, this was quite a feat, and it became possible of the influence of Amal Babu on me.
And when you went to, I'll come back to Delhi University, but when you went to Cambridge University, F.R. Lewis was already there, but his reputation was in decline.
No, it was not in decline, actually.
Yes.
It was only then, very late in life, he came to be recognized. And, professors are petty and mean-minded everywhere. Everyone acknowledged that Lewis was, a pioneer of a new trend of literary criticism, who practically revolutionized the study of literature. But he remained a lecturer all his life. Only in his last year, he was made a reader. And younger people, much younger people, had become professors long ago.
So he was not given his due.
He was not given his due. But not only because of his envy, but he was a very combative fellow.
Okay.
He attacked people he considered enemies mercilessly. So he went on, it was quite difficult to approach him actually. Nights was more easy to sort of approach, but he had a sort of very forbidding countenance. So even when I saw him about 6 or 7 times, I could not pick up courage to meet him and say hello. And and Davies wrote a letter to London Times saying that since he was made reader in the last year of his career, he could expect promotion, pension at the rate of a reader. He drew the lecturer's pension.
Okay.
So the conservatives had their revenge. They were morally, intellectually defeated, but they exacted their revenge.
Okay. So, are you suggesting that kind of narrowness and parochialism also prevailed in Cambridge?
I mean, people were in several circles. Either you are a member of the circle, or if you try to go it alone, it is a very difficult kind of choice there. World-renowned professors, illustrious scholars, they too, moved in those circles. There was, in Bengal, it was not quite like that. Here also, there were also circles, but people were more, open to each other.
Accommodative, liberal.
Open to each other. And, for example, Sunita Chatterjee and Sukumar Sen. Sukumar was Sunita Babu's student. But somehow they fell out, And after that, they would not sort of, associate with each other. But I recall that when they were together in a meeting, there were no fireworks, They were quite civil to each other.
So, what about B.R. Rajan? Means in Delhi University. Another point, sir, because I am not a man from literature.
Yeah.
So, is there any difference between the modernist school and the school of new criticism, or they are the same?
They're the same.
They are the same. So, B.R. Rajan was also, or he also belonged to the school of new criticism?
No, not at all.
Yes.
He was a Milton scholar.
Milton scholar.
And Milton was the devil in the imagination of the new critics. It was he who had spoiled English poetry. It was his sort of monstrous language, That's how they thought of it. That had ruined English literature, and only the metaphysical poets, and then some romantics, not all, and T.S. Eliot sort of rescued English literature from decay. That was the theory,
Yes.
So when I sort of listened to Rajan's lecture, I had no good opinion of Milton. Thanks to our Babu's influence, I did not think highly of him. But when Rajan began to deliver the lectures in a very musical voice, we were deeply impressed, And so I also could see that Milton had certain qualities which the new critics ignored. And I became also, thanks to Rajan, a passionate scholar of Milton.
So I remember his book was published in 1947 itself. So you could read his book during your MA days?
No, it was not available in Delhi University Library. I think it was in Cambridge. I came up only. And his accomplishment was this, that he had probably written the shortest research, the thesis, shortest thesis for PhD at Cambridge.
Oh, his PhD is also from Cambridge University.
Cambridge,
Cambridge
about
University.
90 pages or so.
Okay.
But he was so packed with thought and insight that he was given a PhD.
Okay. He also worked on 17th century. His thesis is titled Paradise Lost and 17th Century Redone.
But by some quirk of fate, by that time I had, come round to a position, a kind of point of view directly opposed to that of B.R. Rajan.
Okay.
He was among the conservative critics of Milton. You see, Milton was originally a radical.
Radical.
He was part of the Puritan revolution that brought about radical changes in the English constitution, English law, English way of governing people, and so on and so forth, and English culture also. It was restrictive in certain ways, but also, what do you say, more dynamic also in certain matters. So, the conservative critics of Milton, scholars, they suppressed certain things, that he was radical. They turned him into the very icon of conservatism.
Yes.
Supporting everything that is there and finding good that everything is there. And this was the story, everybody accepted it because they were great scholars. For example, Tilliard, E.M.W. Tilliard. He was the doyen of the Milton scholars. He wrote book after book.
So he was supervisor of B.R. Rajan, or?
Yeah,
Yes.
Quite right. And, he wrote book after book. Each book was acclaimed for packed scholarship and, information on Milton and so on and so forth. But, all it boiled down to is that Milton was a man in favor of order, in favor of the conservative structure of society and culture, of which the essential part is hierarchy, the distinction between low and high. But then I began thinking at that time, how is it that someone as part of the radical revolution could turn into a sort of, what do you say, a sort of, bard of conservative order.
Yes. So, sir, when did you read Raymond Williams? Why three persons I want to refer to: Perry Anderson, Raymond Williams, and E.P. Thompson.
Raymond Williams, his lectures, at Cambridge, classrooms are always open. Anybody could join a class.
So he was a professor in Cambridge University.
He was a professor at Cambridge. He was a reader at that time. You were given a professor fairly late in life sometimes. But Amartya Sen was among the few young people.
Okay.
Was
made professor.
What was I saying? What was I doing?
Perry Anderson.
And
E.P. Thompson.
E.P. Thompson, I had never met him. See, I'm never good at meeting people.
Yes.
I was a kind of introvert.
But you read his famous making of.
It made a very deep impression on me.
Yes. But interestingly, he was also a person from literature.
No, he was a Marxist.
Uh-huh.
But good historians have a literary quality.
No, I saw an interview of E.P. Thompson. What I could gather that he was in fact trained in English literature.
Huh?
He was trained in English literature.
Maybe.
Later on, he became a historian.
Quite possible.
Yes.
Quite possible.
Yes.
But he was a member of the Communist Party also at that time. And, the book is a literary masterpiece also. Written with passion, clarity, immense variety of
So you are
facts.
referring to Making of the English Working Class. Yes.
Even I think it is sort of, I was absolutely drunk with it, its charm, power for days together.
Yes.
I could only think of that book. So it made a deep
So that
impression.
had an influence in your
Yeah,
in
of
the
course.
writing of your PhD thesis.
No, that did not.
Yes.
But certainly sort of made a deep impression on my thought,
Yes.
on my consciousness, political awareness.
You also mentioned about some interactions with Perry Anderson, writing letters
Now,
to him.
correspondence.
Correspondence,
Yeah.
yes.
He was very civil and thought I was some kind of sort of, elderly professor. But then, of course, he realized that I sort of.
Yes. I'd like to come back again to the modernist school. You have written, particularly in Assamese, you have written extensively about T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot and, Ezra Pound, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Ezra Pound and
Ezra
T.S.
Pound.
Yes, Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot. You mentioned that, and there was something.
And I remember an incident
Yes,
with Raymond Williams.
yes,
Raymond Williams, this is a perennial problem of Marxism.
yes,
Whether Marxist analysis can actually grasp the value of a literary work.
yes,
You can analyze the background. You can concentrate on themes from a Marxist point of view. Whether all that will amount to a correct estimation, appreciation of the value of the literary work. And I thought at that time that Raymond Williams also skirted the problem. For example, when we say somebody is a cultured man, what do we mean by culture? Raymond Williams has a book called Culture and Society.
yes,
And it shows how the word culture arose, what sort of variations it underwent, and how it became the accomplishment, the quality, the virtue of an educated man, educated gentleman, not ordinary people.
yes,
So there's some snobbery in it also. So Raymond Williams said that culture is actually nothing so mystical, nothing so strange,
yes,
that there is no need to sort of go, gaga about it. It is ordinary. Culture is ordinary. I was from he was also a socialist, so basically we had no argument about, the social orientation of Raymond Williams. But I thought that this was probably too much of a simplification. So in his class, I rose and tried to challenge him. And he was at that time sort of taken as a prophet by most students and scholars. He was a scholar, he wrote very well, he was very perceptive also. So people simply would not hear my question. I was run down, but later I met him and he was kinder to me. But so the problem still remains. Whether culture is simply manners, customs, and certain tastes, whether it also amounts to value. F.R. Davis has a very clear-cut answer to it. But his values also derived from what you can call a religious sense. He did not believe in any doctrinal or organized religion. But he thought that all these values, they came out of a higher human consciousness. And that is very precise.
Is it also somewhere I remember you mentioned that the whole approach of Raymond Williams towards culture is also because of his social origin or the class that he belonged to?
That is also there, but there are many people of the same origin. who became sort of supporters of aristocracy. So there is no one-to-one relation.
Yes, yes.
But even like that must have influenced him to go in the direction. And I think the problem still remains. People like us are still wrestling with that question. On the other hand, on the one hand, we want to sort of bridge the gap between the educated and the illiterate, between those who thought themselves cultured and those who were not even aware of it. When you bring a sort of worker, a fine chap otherwise, to an exhibition of paintings, he might not feel at home. So does that reduce his human value? And those people who can appreciate it, are they better than this man? These are very complicated questions. And we are still wrestling with it. With them.
So I'll raise the earlier question that regarding T.S. Eliot and because I remember you mentioned that because they were all critic of modernity, industrialization, or the technology that were ruining the kind of human spirit and creativity. You also mentioned that T.S. Eliot had gone back to spirituality.
Right.
Yes.
Now he even became a practicing Christian.
Yes.
He attended church.
Yes.
Quite religiously and regularly, and which sort of embarrassed and sort of intrigued his friends. They never went to church, never felt bothered about it. Why does this fellow go to church? But he took everything seriously. He's a very serious person. So if I'm attached to a particular religion, I must go through all the rites and rituals it demands.
So do you suggest that he was trying to run away from the kind of situation being created by modernity,
Yeah,
industrialization?
Of course.
Yes.
And he also, you must remember, he was a prophetic sort of he had a prophetic awareness of the evils of modernity, evils of capitalist modernity, like the erosion of soil, like the destruction of environment. Long before these things become favorable, I think in the 30s he was also talking about it. So he had that kind of insight.
Yes.
And what sort of raises him above other religious-minded sort of poets is his profound grasp of the predicament, the dilemma of modern man, and the sense of alienation, hopelessness, and general emptiness beneath all the daily rituals of modern life. Going to club, having parties, this and that. Which fill up the emptiness. There is nothing within. So what is there that man can grasp so that it enables him to go on living? So Eliot was that kind of person. And his poetry also made quite an impression on me, particularly Wasteland. There are other poems or good poems, but I still think Wasteland and Four Quarters, these are the peaks of his achievement.
Yes. So I'll come to your PhD thesis because your PhD thesis has not been talked much about, particularly in our Assamese literature. Neither you have written at length on your PhD thesis. But before that, one thing I find it very interesting. Modernism is a critique of modernity. Adhunikota aru adhunikota bad. Sometimes it creates a lot of confusions that how modernism is a critique of modernity, and what is the line of demarcation exactly?
Actually, the modernity in the contemporary sense had started long back during the period of the Enlightenment. And some people could even go back to Renaissance.
Yes.
The triumph of rationalism and science, and the hope and the faith that everything can be settled Every question can be settled by science and reason. This is modernity. And it has made great strides, brought about great improvement in human life, but there's something seems to be lacking here. For example, look at any employer of a sort of modern corporation. He makes money, lives a comfortable life, nothing, there are no basic wants that he or his family suffer. But is that all? Auden has a poem, you remember, The Unknown Citizen.
Yes.
Someone, he gives the details of his life, daily life, his career, so on and so forth. At the end he writes, but then what is it all about? What is his life about? So, that kind of thing, So, so modernism comes late, modernity much earlier. It continues, and in some parts of India, modernity has just penetrated.
Yes.
So that is one thing. And modernism, a particular movement, particularly turned against romanticism.
Okay.
And, it's a complicated story of cultural history. So, see, the romantics, for all their, enthusiasm and passion for, nature, they believe fundamentally and distinctively they are marked by their faith in man. Man himself is the center of all things, and he has some potentiality to overcome himself. Shelley is a quintessential example, but even sort of a Wordsworth you can put in the same category in some ways. Because though he believed in nature, he thought that human beings, by exposing themselves to nature, they can grow better human beings and so on and so forth. But the modernists, all of them did not say that, but some said explicitly that that is not the whole story. The world is much bigger than human beings, and there are things that human beings cannot know through science and rationality. It is through religious disciplines and organized religions that people can approach. So it was the modernists are basically conservative, as Eliot was, and Pound became so conservative, he joined the fascists. And poor fellow, he had to pay hard for his passion, because during the war he stayed in Italy.
Yes.
And he broadcast several,
in favor of
in favor of Mussolini and fascism. And the Americans were so disgusted because their sons were killed at the battlefield. They put him in an iron cage.
Yes.
Like a dog. And let him live there for years and years. Until the poets, for I think several years, maybe more than 10 years. Imagine a man living like a dog within an iron cage.
Yes.
And then Eliot and other people teamed up and sort of petitioned the American government, and he was released. So you see, even W.B. Yeats, who appears to us as more available, more accessible than modernists, because there is not so much show learning there. But he was a modernist of sorts. And William Butler Yeats also had some conservative tendency. And they sort of admired Chinese and Japanese poetry, particularly because they were the products of an elite. An elite who cared for language and made a craft out of it. And their sensibility was something apart from that of ordinary human beings. So that's sort of Mandarinate culture,
So you called it Ucho Man, higher value or higher standard value.
No, I mean the religious idea that there is something higher than man, which cannot be accessed through rationality and science.
Okay.
And that has to be, and that sort of also makes for differences among human beings.
Okay.
So
So
that,
when you wrote, for example, I think in 1970s you wrote F.R. Leavis or Gobirota, 15 F.R. Leavis. Did you suggest that the kind of things that modernist school talked about had relevance for a situation like Assam?
you see, I must confess one thing. I remain deeply attached to and influenced by F.R. Leavis and his company for years and years,
Yes.
even after I became a Marxist.
Marxist, yes. Yes.
So the moral core of literature
yes.
has always appealed to me.
Yes.
But now I think I can reconcile that sort of morality to Marxism.
Yes.
But when I wrote that essay, I was not writing as a Marxist.
Okay.
I
Same
was,
is the case with your evaluation of new criticism. নতুন সমালোচনাৰ জবনিকা, you wrote end of the new criticism, but then you still argued that new criticism has relevance for a situation like Assamese literature.
no, it is particularly relevant today because, nowadays there's a very powerful school, postmodernism.
Yes.
It is so analytical, so critical that, it boils down to the fact that there is nothing at the core of any literary work.
Okay.
It can all be reduced to concepts, ideas.
Yes.
And they are vulnerable to all kinds of criticism.
Okay. And all sorts of relativism.
That makes the critic feel very superior.
Yes.
But as if there is nothing to learn from
Yes, sir.
literary works, and which I find very distasteful.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And I was saying that this attention to the text with some kind of reverence, that remains relevant today because of the evil influence of postmodernism.
Yes. So now I want to talk about your PhD. As I said that your thesis has not very comprehensively been discussed in Assamese literature. You have also not written extensively on it. You have written on all other dimensions, F.R. Leavis, new criticism, T.S. Eliot and all. But regarding your PhD thesis, you have published it 1977, but you have not written it extensively in Assamese. I have not seen at least a very comprehensive article on, Paradise Lost.
No, but I neglected doing so.
Yes.
For
Was it intentional or what?
You might say intentional also.
Yes.
Because, to make sense of Milton,
Yes.
you require a knowledgeable background which is simply not available
Okay.
among
Yes.
educated Assamese people also.
Yes.
Let me give an example. After coming back from Britain, I taught for about 5 or 6 months at Dibrugarh University.
Yes.
Because they offered me a job with good pay. I had gone there. And I was lecturing on Paradise Lost. Students are sort of listening with rapt attention. I became very popular as a teacher, their lecturer. But one day a doubt struck me.
Yes.
Have the students really understood what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, I say the Paradise Lost begins with the words. What are the words? About the fall of man.
Yes. Fall of man. Yeah.
Fall of man. So I asked the students, what is fall of man?
Fall of man.
This is the very first of it. Nobody knew. Very funny one. So
is it something because
I felt like a punctured balloon. So there are a lot of scholarly knowledge will be necessary for people to understand Milton as a poet of Paradise Lost.
Yes, sir.
The whole thing, God, Satan.
Yes.
In Indian religion, we have no idea about Satan. Mohammedanism, Islam has some, And in Christianity, it goes very deep.
Yes.
So the fall of man, to explain in short, is that human beings are doomed, determined to, to have lapses,
Yes.
moral lapses,
Ethical, yes.
and also other kinds of lapses. Like, for example, you cannot always fulfill your dream. There is also something, lacking, something you think that it has not been, achieved. And then also, it may very well go into go the other ways and leave you with a bad taste in your mouth.
Yes.
So there is imperfection in our very life.
Yes. Yes.
This imperfection is traced to the fall of man from a heavenly state.
Yes.
Yes. So this idea is not at all popular or common, or even people are
In
not
our
even aware.
situation. Yes.
So if I write about it, who will understand?
Yes.
And also, I'm not simply sort of content with, I was discussing the debates on the story. What is fall between the Puritans and the Catholics, Protestants and Catholics, various schools of Protestantism. These things should make no sense to us.
Okay.
And even to some people in Britain now, it will become totally obscure.
Okay.
But
what about the common readers will not understand it, because I have read your thesis maybe twice.
Yeah.
It was quite difficult for me.
Yeah.
But literature people probably thought that it's a literary piece, and they found out that it's more of a piece on history rather than literature. And history people thinks that it is a literary piece.
Yeah.
So,
Quite
so
right.
is it that kind of confusion? Because for me as a social scientist, I found it to be very interesting.
Yeah.
When I saw that you have talked about the covenant, you have talked about social contract, you have referred to Thomas Hobbes, you have referred to John Locke, and all this, the whole historical evolution in ideas, political ideas, ideas on freedom, ideas on liberty, and so on and so forth. So my question is, what influenced you? Because you said that it was not B.R. Rajan's treatment of Paradise Lost. Your treatment of Paradise Lost is quite different. What did influence you to go into that depth of the historical inquiry?
No. By that time, I had become aware of two things.
Yes, sir.
That a literary critic is not innocent.
Yes.
It is not that he can sort of grasp the object of literature, the text, for example, as it is. He brings his own bias, ideological bias, into the study of it. And there is the main story of the 17th century is the conflict between the conservatives and the Puritans. It is the the Protestants, and the Puritans are the extreme form of Protestantism. So the Protestants and the Catholics are worrying about the meaning of the fall.
Yes.
Worrying about the basic necessities of human life. For example, I traced the story of the debate between degree and order.
Degree and order. Yes.
Degree and covenant.
Covenant. Yes. Levelers. You talked about the levelers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Covenant is each individual's particular contract with God.
Yes.
Each individual can
have their own
enter
contract
into and establish his own contract with God.
Yes.
Without reference to anything else.
Yes.
Whereas degree is order.
Order.
It means that you are subjected to certain constraints, certain limitations in your relation to God.
God.
And only priests can mediate between you
and the God.
And God.
God.
And there is no way.
Yes.
But in Protestantism, there are no middlemen. There are no priests in Protestantism, only in Catholicism.
Yes.
So it's a basic fundamental division.
Difference between
and a kind of rupture,
Yes.
And so, these things, I think common people will not be interested.
Okay.
But through this whole story, a great change, phenomenal change of European culture is taking place. So it is important.
What was Milton's own political position? He was also not very sure Means as I read your thesis, I could find out that he was moving towards quote unquote the levelers, but then he was not completely living out his that religious position and so on and so forth.
It's a very good question.
Yes.
You see, Milton, when he wrote the pamphlet
Yes.
Areopagitica,
Okay.
which is still treasured by liberals all over the world as a great document in
Yes.
favor of freedom of speech. But later he came on to a position that freedom of speech all right, but it should be rationed.
Okay.
All people should not have the
get
same kind
Okay.
of
So
because
there will also be hierarchy in freedom.
no, he won't say hierarchy or degree, but he did make some kind of difference, didn't he?
Okay. It's not universal.
Yeah.
It will not be universally equal.
It is there are more learned people, more good, better people, wiser people, and there are people who are less wise, less bright, and all that. So, how did it come about? Milton, when he wrote Areopagitica, he was all in favor of revolution.
Okay.
And he became the foreign secretary of the
So it was
revolution.
before Paradise Lost.
No, before that.
Yes.
He became the foreign secretary
Foreign
of the
secretary.
revolutionary government.
Okay.
But then what happened is that the aristocrats or middle class people in the revolutionary group, they began to come kind of sort of it's a head-on struggle with them.
Yes.
With the levelers, people who represent the common people, leaders who represent common people. There's a great debate, fierce, and ultimately it sort of turned into some kind of military, opposition. Of course, the levelers they lost, but then Milton was midway between them. He thought that the common people should be given some advantage, some scope to fulfill themselves and help the government. Levelers wanted much more than that, but that was his position. But he didn't like that the levelers should threaten the revolutionary government.
Okay.
Because it had sort of broken loose from the monarchy, and it was an achievement in itself.
You also, sir, indicated that there were familiarity in terms of writings or in terms of positions taken by John Locke.
Yeah.
So Milton had an understanding about that.
Yeah, you see, you remember that the position taken by the Protestants was that in favor of liberty.
Liberty, yeah.
Against hierarchy.
Yes.
In the beginning, he was all for liberty, as I said. He said, liberty has certain defects, but even that, in the interest of the greater welfare of human beings and progress, it must be accepted. But he sort of veered away from that position later in life. And he felt very bitter that the challenge of levelers had actually caused the destruction of the revolutionary government and the restoration of the monarchy.
Okay.
And he would have been executed but for the help provided by some in the revolutionary group, who were his admirers, like Andrew Marvell.
So, but then, what is the impact? Means your research on Milton and your future work, future writings, future work as a literary critic.
I had left something else.
Yes, sir.
I would like to go back to it. You see, you were talking about Locke.
John Locke, yes.
When John Locke, wrote about liberty,
yes,
he was the first person to theorize that idea of human liberty and the state, the society and the state. It indicates
relationship. Yes.
Yeah.
Two treatises.
What kind of state there should be if a human being has to be, each human being has to be liberal, education free, and that kind of thing. And interestingly, he also talks about Adam and Eve.
Locke.
Locke.
Okay, I didn't know it. Yeah.
And it was, I think, I said that it could be explained by the fact that at the headstand of his book, of the
Yes.
bed,
Yes. Yes.
there's always this volume of Paradise Lost.
Paradise Lost. Yes, you mentioned it.
So
You had written in your thesis.
Yeah,
Yes.
so even though he was a you know, very erudite man, he had his limitations due to the age in which he lived. So the influence of the Bible and the false story was still very powerful.
Powerful.
And that's why, he by reading the Bible in the light of Milton's Paradise Lost, I think he developed the ideas which he put into modern rational terms.
Yes, sir.
The idea of civil rights and those things.
So then, what is its influence? Your influence of your research in your future, writings as a literary critic.
Now you see, I realized that the conservative critics of Milton, who had distorted his meaning, they also admired Milton,
Yes,
but
sir.
for the wrong reasons.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And I think, they distorted Milton because they couldn't understand the basic ideas.
Yes.
So if you want to read a poem thoroughly, you must be ideologically self-aware. I'll explain one thing. So the other day, in your presence, I was reading out Navakanta Boda's
Navakanta Boda's poem. Yes.
Ubhoti Har Kotha. There's a refined line there. Khujya porikrama shekh, Kambhu kantha, kon shigrahar, kon pantha ghormua, shekh kori tirtha jatra, bohu byarthatar. Juti bola, khabor nolaba tar. What is the, it's a very sort of, it sounds very nice, musical. And you somehow feel at one with it, in spirit. But now what is the poem actually saying? He is saying that there is no point in making any effort at all to improve life, improve society and so on. All these panthos, the pilgrims, they return broken, defeated from all such adventures. Unless you are aware of the ideological stand, you cannot understand the point.
Yes.
And if you do understand, you will be somewhat perturbed. What is this fellow saying? That shouldn't it attempt at all to improve our lives? He says, no, all these attempts had ended in failure. So, the scrutiny group, the new critics, had actually bypassed that very troubling
Ideological, political question.
Political
Ideological question.
This cannot be actually, dismissed like that. And so, my ideological awareness made me sort of read Jivan or Baton by Birichi Gorani.
We'll talk about it, sir, comprehensively.
Yeah.
Okay. Just I was asking that means your research on Milton and your approach to the Paradise Lost had a lasting impact.
It does.
Yes, sir.
It does.
Yes, sir.
Now, I mean, it could have been sort of found also in Shakespeare, but Milton was, more suitable for such treatment because he came at the very sort of crossroads.
Yes, sir.
Of modernism and our world today.
Yes, sir. And because subsequently you also read a lot of other Marxist critics. I think you talked about it, but then you also referred to Mao Zedong.
Yeah. At that time, I was very much impressed and influenced by him. I'm not so sure today.
Yes, sir.
I don't think about Marxism very much nowadays.
Okay. All right, sir. So thank you.
I think it was his adventurism
Yes.
that led to the failure of the
Cultural
great
revolution.
famine, huh?
Yes, great famine.
And
Yeah,
the
great
cultural
famine.
revolution.
Cultural revolution also.
Both wasted Chinese resources
Okay.
and brought about great misery
Okay.
to millions of
Yes, sir.
human beings there.
So I'll finally ask you about two, critics or critical theorists, George Lucas and Brecht. George Lucas and Brecht, and you said that they also brought new ways of understanding literature, or there could be variations even the Marxist approach to literature.
Lukács actually belonged to the idealistic school of culture criticism
Yes.
that derived from Hegel.
Okay.
He has a very interesting, book called The Birth of the Novel or something like that. I forgot the title now. He says that when the epics were written, there was a wholeness of society.
Yes.
Society was not well fragmented. So there is a sense of unity and wholeness in society, which also came out in literature. Wholeness. That whatever tragedy is there, at the end of the story, you find some meaning in it. Whereas in modern capitalism, he didn't use the word capitalism at that time. He was not Marxist at the time. But in modern times, this story becomes fragmented.
Yes.
There is nothing whole that can be grasped.
Yes.
Each individual on his own. Wow. So he said very interestingly that novels are quests for the
Okay.
lost meaning. They deal with people as they are in modern life, in modern situations. But the end is to grasp the wholeness of meaning that has been lost from life.
Okay.
Ah,
Okay.
ah. And then he he also became sort of converts. He converted to Marxism. And then he put all that in the language of class and so on. So, for example, the socialist society, it gives you the sense of the whole. Ah. And in more, say, great fiction of the 19th century, Walter Scott, Tolstoy, those great people. In those people, he thinks everyone struggling
Yes.
with fate, with life, and with other people, with his own life, in order to achieve, grasp that wholeness which has been lost.
Yes.
The same approach put in classical Marxist terms.
Okay.
Yeah. And also he wrote about character, that the character is also very important in
Yes,
novel.
sir.
But not simply as the distinct individuals, but for careers of certain kinds of meaning. Some characters, for example, they symbolize decay. He very finely examines some of the characters and displays it. And also some characters, they show the signs of regrowth, who embody the possibility of regrowth. These are different. So there are types of the critics,
Okay.
we have characters. So these are very interesting things he talks about. And not that I'm greatly impressed by him.
Yes.
And I think that literary works do have implicit social visions.
Yes.
Sometimes it is lost. Let me give an example. We are all enchanted with Bonalota Sen.
Bonalota Sen. Yes.
And he says, when the light of the day is gone, থাকে শুধু অন্ধকার মুখোমুখি বসিবার আমি আর নাটোরের বনলতা সেন. Why Natur? He could have used any other name. Why not? Now, somebody had written in Bangladesh, Natur was actually well known in those days
Okay.
for concubines of zamindars,
Okay.
accomplished, beautiful ladies who were kept as mistresses by zamindars who used to visit them regularly from Kolkata. And otherwise they were alone. And apparently the hero of this poem, হাজার বছর ধরে আমি পথ হাঁটিতেছি পৃথিবীর পথে সিংহল সমুদ্র ঘুরে বিম্বিসার অসুখের ধূসর জগতে. So he comes down to modern life. And even in modern life, he finds no rest. His soul has become restless. So he finds some rest, some temporary anchorage in Bernard Larsen, who was not a real lover of his, but so that puts the whole poem under different kinds of guise.
Interpretations,
And it shows the despair.
Yes.
The disenchantment with life. And, so temporary, short-lived, bliss that such contexts.
We have looked into various theoretical premises, theoretical debates, and all these have contributed in making Professor Gohain a kind of most cited literary critic in Assamese literature. So when we come back next, we'll talk about your contribution to Assamese literature as a critic. We'll look at your writings on Sankardev, your writings on Bej Borua, Bani Kanto, Jyoti Prasad, Ajit Borua, Navakanto, everyone till to the new generation, Nilim Kumar, Nandita Devi, and everyone. So thank you very much for your part. Thank you.